controversy that has really just taken over the world of college basketball.
Oh, absolutely. And the media landscape around it.
And we're looking at source material that is just filled with this incredibly strong language. Things like nasty work, disrespect through the roof, and this really serious claim that a major sports network was, quote, manipulating numbers.
That's right. And what we're really looking at here is something that feels a lot more complex than just a simple mistake on a graphic. It's an alleged, strategic move by a huge network, ESPN, to frame a very specific narrative.
And what was that narrative?
The goal, or at least what our sources are claiming the goal was to intentionally minimize the really historic accomplishments of one player, Caitlin Clark, and sort of put her on the same level as these other incredible emerging talents.
How easily context can be just stripped away from data, and maybe get into why these huge influential organizations might engage in what critics are calling narrative painting.
And goalpost moving. That's the other phrase that keeps coming up.
Exactly. And to do this, we're using some really detailed source excerpts that they break down the specific graphic, the fan reaction, which was intense, and the analysis from people like Rachel Demita of the Courtside Club podcast.
And this all leads to the core question, the reason this should matter to you, even if you don't follow college basketball that closely.
Right.
In this age of just constant information where we rely on these trusted sources to, make sense of it all, what happens when those sources decide that the storyline is more important than the actual facts?
It's a huge question. And this whole thing is like a perfect case study in media literacy, especially when you're talking about someone who's statistically dominant.
A generational talent.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's start at the beginning, the trigger event. The whole controversy really exploded after one specific game on January 11th.
That was Notre Dame versus North Carolina, a big-time matchup.
And the focus of the broadcast, at least initially, was on the incredible performance from Notre Dame's star, Hannah Hidalgo.
JHH, yeah. She is a premier talent, no question. Our sources use some really powerful language for her, a monster on the floor.
I saw that.
And a lot of people are calling her the best offensive weapon in college basketball right now among guards. Now, you have to mention Aaliyah Edwards from UConn is always in that conversation.
Of course.
But HH is absolutely in that top tier. And you have to remember, she's only eligible for the WNBA in 2027. She's just getting started.
And she had a huge night in that game. So 31 points. But it wasn't just the number, right? It was who she did it against.
Exactly. That 31-point game was her 5th career game scoring 30 or more points against an AP-ranked opponent. And that specific milestone, that's what we need to focus on. That's what kicked this all off.
And that metric, 30-plus points against a ranked team, it's a big deal. It's not just about scoring.
Not at all. I mean, think about it. You're facing top-tier defenses, usually in these really high-pressure games.
Right.
So putting up 30 points in that situation shows more than just scoring. It shows efficiency, it shows poise, it shows you can carry your team against the best of the best.
So for a young player like Hannah Hidalgo to already have 5 of those games, that is a clear sign that she belongs in, the elite company of college players.
Absolutely. It's a huge achievement.
And because it was such a big milestone, the network, ESPN, they decided to commemorate it, which is, standard practice.
Totally normal. They created a graphic. The title was simple: most 30-point games versus AP-ranked opponents.
And this graphic listed 4 of the biggest names in the game. This is where the trouble really starts.
It featured Juju Watkins, or JW, Caitlin Clark, CC, Paige Bueckers, PB, and of course, Hannah Hidalgo, HH.
And the way it was laid out, the visual hierarchy, it gave you a very specific first impression.
It really did. At a quick glance, it looked like a super tight race at the top. Juju Watkins was listed with 10 games, so she's at the top of the list.
Right, leading the pack.
Then Caitlin Clark was listed second with 7, and then you had Paige Bueckers and Hannah Hidalgo tied with 5 each.
And you have to picture this. The graphic flashes up on screen for maybe 10, 15 seconds during a break in the action. If you're just a casual fan, or you're even a diehard who's just looking down at your phone for a second, your takeaway is immediate.
Yeah, you think, wow, okay, these are the top 4.
Right. Juju Watkins is the leader,
Right.
and Caitlin Clark is only a couple of games ahead of the other 2. It visually communicates this idea of parity, of a really close competition.
And that visual communication, that image of a tight race, is exactly what lit the fuse on this whole thing.
Which brings us right into part 2, deconstructing the data, the fine print problem. This is where we have to dig into the technical details and see what's really going on.
This is where we have to credit those sharp analysts like Rachel DeIda, who immediately looked past the headline numbers.
She called it out right away.
She did. She called it cherry-picked and misleading. And the problem wasn't celebrating Hannah Hidalgo's achievement. That was totally deserved. It was the context they used for Caitlin Clark's number.
Or the context they didn't use.
Precisely. The whole statistical manipulation, the whole argument, it all comes down to one tiny, almost hidden piece of fine print.
The crucial timeline disclosure.
That's it. Rachel DeIda pointed out that the graphic was only tracking stats since the 2023-2024 season.
And that one little detail completely changes the meaning of the graphic's title, right?
Yeah.
Most 30-point games versus AP-ranked opponents. That sounds like a career total.
It implies a career total. That's what anyone would assume. But that clause, since the 2023-2024 season, it's like a statistical time machine. It resets the clock for some players, but not for others.
It's completely arbitrary.
It is. When you're comparing players from different classes, a senior against a freshman or a sophomore, a title like most X Games has to mean career totals. Otherwise, the comparison is meaningless.
So let's break down exactly how that arbitrary cutoff date misrepresented each player.
Okay, so when you look at the impact, the alleged manipulation just becomes crystal clear. Let's go down the list.
Start with Juju Watkins. She was at the top with 10 games.
Right. And JW is an incredible player, but those 10 games, our sources note, were accumulated over roughly 2 seasons of play. So for her, the graphic basically counted her entire career total in this category.
Okay, so her number was accurate to her career so far.
Yes. The number shown matched her career volume. Now, Paige Bueckers, PB, was listed with 5 games.
And her 5.
Also accumulated over about 2 seasons when you account for the time she missed with injuries. So again, that number 5 basically represented her full career total up to that point.
So for 2 of the 4 players, the number we see is their career number.
And for Hannah Hidalgo, the same thing. She was listed with 5 games, and those were accumulated over her season and a half of college ball. So for 3 of the 4 players, the number shown is their total career output in that specific stat.
But then we get to Caitlin Clark, the focal point of all this.
And this is where it all falls apart. She was listed with 7 games, which put her in second place on the graphic, but those 7 games were only from the first few months of the 2023-2024 season.
So just from October to that game on January 11th.
Exactly. Her entire historic record-breaking career before that, the 3+ seasons, just gone, wiped from the graphic completely.
And that is the absolute core of the manipulate numbers accusation.
It has to be. By cutting off Clark's stats and only showing that recent partial season, they get the number 7. And 7 is close to 10 and is close to 5. It creates that visual illusion of parity.
Like 10, 7, 5, 5. It looks like a horse race.
It looks like a horse race, but it's a statistical fallacy disguised as a real comparison. I mean, imagine if we were talking about Babe Ruth's home run record.
Okay.
And we compared it to modern players, but we only counted the home runs Ruth hit in, say, August of his final season.
You'd get a tiny number. It would be meaningless.
Completely meaningless. It would be totally detached from his legacy. And that's exactly what the sources are accusing the network of doing here. They're comparing a snapshot of a veteran to the full career totals of younger players.
The logical flaw is just, it's undeniable. If your graphic is titled most 30-point games, it is just fundamentally dishonest to include 3+ seasons for some players and only a few months for the one player who actually holds the record.
And what makes it feel so egregious to the critics is the stat they chose. 30-point games versus ranked opponents. That's a volume stat. It's a cumulative achievement.
It rewards longevity.
Exactly. It rewards consistency over time. And by stripping away Clark's longevity, they stripped away the very thing that defines her dominance in this category.
So the visual deception was a success. It made the numbers look close. But now we need to just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get into part 3, the full reality. What is Caitlin Clark's actual unmodified career total?
And this is where the difference is just staggering. It really validates all the frustration you see in the source material.
Okay, what's the number?
When you take away that arbitrary 2023-2024 cutoff and you look at her full accurate career, the real number isn't 7, it's 23.
23.
23 games with 30 or more points against AP-ranked opponents. over her entire career at Iowa from 2020 to early 2024.
So 7 versus 23. That's more than 3 times what they showed viewers.
It's a completely different stratosphere. If that graphic had accurately shown the number 23, the visual comparison would have been impossible.
You can't even put it on the same chart, really.
Right. Clark's bar on the graph would have dwarfed everyone else's. Juju Watkins' 10, which is a phenomenal number for a young player,
It is, yeah.
would look impressive but distant. And Hannah Hidalgo's 5 would be seen for what it is. A sign that she's joining a very exclusive club where Caitlin Clark is already, statistically in a league of her own.
So showing the number 7 wasn't just an omission. The critics are saying it was, like, contextual sabotage. It was an attempt to manage the audience's perception of just how big that gap really is.
The true gap shows separation, and according to the source material, that's what the network seems determined to hide.
And that huge discrepancy, the fact that she had 23 of these 30 balls versus AP-ranked opponents, as the source puts it, and they chose to show only 7. That's why the graphic was immediately called nasty work.
The criticism boils down to one question: why? Why try to manipulate stats to try to make it seem like these other people are on Caitlin Clark's level?
And that gets us to the motivation. Because you have to wonder why a major network would risk its credibility like this.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Is it possible this was just a mistake? A producer made a typo, a graphics person pulled the wrong data query. Just a clumsy but innocent error.
I mean, it's possible. Human error is always possible.
But the very specific nature of this omission makes that a really tough pill to swallow, especially when you see how fast and how intense the backlash was.
Right.
The consensus among the critics is that this was intentional. This was narrative construction. Because in sports broadcasting, what drives engagement?
Rivalries, competition.
Competition, and nothing creates engagement like a good rivalry.
So if Clark is way out at 23, and the next closest active player is at 10, that doesn't really sell the story of a tight race.
Not at all. It doesn't promote the up-and-coming talent in the same way. The network has a vested interest in promoting the next generation.
Juju Watkins.
Juju Watkins is a future superstar. Promoting her as a direct rival to Clark keeps people watching for the next few years. It makes future drafts more marketable. If the graphic showed 23, it would just emphasize the separation. It might even undermine the network's investment in building up that next wave of stars.
So they were prioritizing the story of competition over the fact of dominance.
That's the argument. They wanted to create a manufactured rivalry, or at least manufactured parity, because that sells better than one player just running away with all the records. The source material is very critical of this, saying, I don't know why y'all playing this game and trying to make it seem like Juju is close.
And we have to remember the timeline for these other players. Even if Juju, who has 2 more seasons,
Right.
if she keeps up this incredible pace, she would still have to basically double her current career total just to get close to Clark's 23.
The gap is huge, it's generational. So by artificially shrinking it, the network is accused of damaging the integrity of the data and maybe more importantly, damaging the trust of their audience.
So to sum up this part, the mechanism was the timeline, and the motivation was arguably commercial. Create visual parity, create rivalries, promote multiple athletes at once, even if it means sacrificing accuracy for the most dominant player.
It's a really dangerous precedent because once sports fans can't trust the basic stats they're being shown,
You start to question everything.
you question the whole system. And the sources we're looking at suggest that questioning the system is exactly where fans are at, because this graphic isn't seen as an isolated incident. It's framed as part of a much bigger systemic pattern of disrespect.
And that's our transition. This graphic is just the tip of the iceberg, according to these sources. We have to go to part 4, the wider climate of perceived disrespect. Because this stat manipulation is being presented as proof of something much broader.
The source material is, it's unequivocal on this. It sees this whole situation as being consistent with this persistent, pervasive disrespect that comes from all different parts of the basketball world.
And they claim it involves really powerful groups and people who have influence over her career, both now and in the future.
That's right. And they're not vague about it. They name names, or at least types of people. The sources point to players and coaches, to officials and league leadership, and even to the WNBA Players Association.
Let's break those claims down, because they're pretty serious. Starting with the coaches. The source specifically calls out Cheryl Reeves-type coaches.
Right. And they allege that coaches like this are actively trying to keep Clark off the Olympic team.
And that's not just about, not liking a player's style. That's an accusation of a calculated strategic move from established figures in the sport.
If you really unpack that, it suggests that there are influential voices in the selection process who might be resistant to the sudden shift in attention and power that Clark represents.
Because established coaches often prefer players who fit a certain system or who've been in the Team USA program for years.
Exactly. Clark is a disruptive force. She's a college player who, because of her skill and her unprecedented popularity, could just walk onto that roster and take a spot from a long-serving veteran.
And that creates internal politics. The source is basically alleging that to maintain the status quo, to control the hierarchy, these power brokers are trying to minimize her on the biggest international stage.
It's a fascinating and frankly cynical view of the politics behind a roster selection, but the critique doesn't stop there. It goes even higher up the chain.
All the way to officials and league leadership.
The sources specifically mention the referees and the WNBA commissioner Kathy Engelberg as part of this system.
When you start including the referees, that's a whole other level. It's not just about blown calls anymore.
No, it's a suggestion that there's a bias in how games are officiated, a feeling that maybe Clark doesn't get the same calls, or that it's harder for her team to get a fair whistle, which creates this extra barrier to her success.
And bringing in Kathy Engelberg, the commissioner of the WNBA, that raises the stakes even more.
It does, because if the sources believe this negative climate is being, tolerated or even sanctioned at the very top of the professional league she's about to enter,
it implies a lack of institutional support, or maybe even a strategic decision from the league to try and manage her arrival so she doesn't completely overshadow everyone else.
The implication is massive. It suggests that the disrespect isn't just random fan noise, but a systemic problem woven into how the sport is governed, from the Olympic team down to the college game and her future pro career.
But I think the most complicated accusation is the one against the WNBPA, the Players Association.
Yeah, that one is complex. The source alleges that the union is trying to use her to get more money, but at the same time, disrespecting the fans that she brought to the table.
Which sounds contradictory, but you can see the logic.
You can. Clark is an economic engine. There's no debating that. Her joining the WNBA is going to boost TV deals, ticket sales, merch sales, all of which benefits every single member of the union.
So the union needs her popularity to raise their own collective bargaining power.
They do. But the source claims that while they're happy to take that economic boom, the union and some of its members are failing to respect where it comes from. They're not acknowledging Clark's greatness or the new massive fan base she's bringing with her.
This tension happens in a lot of industries when a disruptive, super high-profile person comes in.
It does. The WNBPA's main job is to represent the interests of the current established veterans. And while they want the money Clark brings, some of those members might feel threatened by the media spotlight she gets. Or they might feel that all this focus on one player diminishes the hard work of everyone else in the league.
So the source's view is that the union is being transactional. They want the money, but they're resistant to the cultural shift she represents. And that comes across as disrespect.
And all this together, the coaches, the officials, the union, it creates this feeling among her supporters that they are constantly up against these powerful forces, these narrative painters and goalpost movers.
Narrative painting is such a good term for it. It suggests that these groups aren't just reacting to what's happening, they are actively creating the story they want people to believe.
Exactly. When the media uses a misleading graphic, they're painting a picture of a tight competition.
And goalpost moving is the idea that no matter what she accomplishes, the criteria for greatness just keeps changing.
She breaks the scoring record, so the conversation shifts to her defense. She leads in assists, and something else becomes more important. In this case, her career stats are ignored in favor of a short, arbitrary timeline.
And that fight against all of this is why this deep dive is so relevant to you, the listener. This whole saga shows that a sports narrative is an active, often political process.
ESPN, with that graphic, was prioritizing the story they wanted to tell, a story of parity and new rivalries, over the empirical fact of Clark's dominance.
It just highlights how important it is to be critical, to not just take a graphic at face value, even from a source you trust. You have to look at the fine print.
As we found out, the difference between 7 and 23 was hiding in that one tiny disclaimer.
And if the whole environment feels like it's trying to minimize a player's achievements, it just becomes a constant battle for the fan base to even have a conversation based on shared reality.
It's exhausting for them.
This has been, honestly, a pretty alarming look at how stats can be used, or maybe weaponized, in the battle over sports narratives.
It has. So to summarize our key takeaways here, we saw that the ESPN graphic presented a deeply misleading comparison. Caitlin Clark's career total for this specific metric was 23 games.
And the graphic showed 7.
7. By only counting that one partial season, that was the clear mechanism of the alleged manipulation.
And the intent, according to critics, wasn't just to celebrate Hannah Dalgo's milestone. It was to actively control the comparison and create a false visual of a close race when the statistical gap was actually huge.
We also looked at the potential why, the commercial need for a major network to build engagement by manufacturing new rivalries, even if it means twisting the context of historical achievements to do it.
And finally, we looked at that wider climate of perceived disrespect. The really serious claims from our source material against coaches, officials, and the WNBA, all suggesting a larger pattern of trying to manage or minimize Clark's impact.
And the main lesson in all of this is just the power of context. Media outlets have a huge responsibility to be clear and accurate, especially with historical stats. And when they choose a narrative over a fact, you have to ask,
What's the point?
what is the point of showing data if its main function is to mislead your audience into thinking a competition is closer than it actually is?
And when these big, powerful organizations are willing to bend timelines like this, the long-term cost is just a huge erosion of fan trust. The credibility of sports statistics itself starts to crumble.
The second the audience starts thinking every graphic is just narrative painting, the whole relationship between the media and the fans breaks down.
And the sources say this fight is far from over. If the stats are being manipulated to create this artificial parity, how can fans really appreciate the scale of what they're seeing?
So here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with today.
Think about the long-term cost to the sport itself. If all future records are set against this backdrop of manufactured stats and perceived institutional resistance, does the audience lose the ability to celebrate true generational greatness when it happens?
And what happens to the integrity of the record books when the people in charge of the facts are more interested in controlling the story?
Thank you for joining us on this into a very complex intersection of sports, stats, and narrative control.
Keep that critical eye sharp and always read the fine print.
We'll catch you next time.